Support for the Living Wisdom podcast is provided by In Touch Pharmaceuticals, a long-term care pharmacy committed to meeting the specialized pharmaceutical needs of their clients. Visit intouchpharma.com. Hey, welcome back to our Living Wisdom podcast. I'm Karsten alongside Deb Carriveau, and we're getting a little spicy during this episode, if you will. We're talking about keeping your love alive when you are looking after your loved one going through dementia. And even though people probably don't talk about this a lot, I guess it's never a question that someone has brought up when we've been doing our forums, where a lot of people come together. But it's probably something that everybody thinks about. So where do you even start tackling something like this?
So one of the things that's important for caregivers and spouses to think about as you're on this journey is that oftentimes for people who are living this journey of dementia, they don't necessarily know or recognize the need for physical intimacy per se.
Okay.
Oftentimes, by the time they get into the middle to moderate stages of dementia, things that are physically intimate have a tendency to be driven by kind of that pubescent hormonal kind of thing, which is just about that basilar need for physical contact. And because of that, sometimes you'll see loved ones with dementia, want to play kissy face with another person in their environment who isn't necessarily their spouse. They might want to do some touchy-feely kinds of things. And the thing that's important for caregivers to remember is that the way individuals on this disease process go through retrogenesis, they may be living back in a time when they were 16 or 17 or 18 years old. I still think I'm the high school football star who is, making out with the cheerleaders under the bleachers or whatever the scenario might be. So part of how all of that evolves depends on how a person is going through that journey and what is their sense of reality. If a spouse walks into an environment and sees their loved one holding hands with another person or sitting next and playing, patsy on the knee with another individual, they need to understand that that is about the disease process, not about how they truly feel about their spouse. It's not that they're rejecting their spouse in any way. What is important is to understand that when a person gets a diagnosis of dementia, it does not mean that your relationship with your loved one or your relationship as a spouse or significant other is going to all of a sudden fall apart and be devoid of any tenderness or light or love. That's absolutely not true. But what does change is how that love is expressed. What does that level of intimacy look like, and how do you express love, particularly when part of the difficulty for a partner or a spouse when they have a loved one with dementia is oftentimes the person with dementia doesn't know how to return the expression of love. Doesn't mean they don't love you, but how they express that love or what that looks like is altered and changed by the disease process. And so a lot of that love expression, a lot of that connection falls on the caregiver to be able to keep that alive and continue to connect to that.
And so what does that look like, right? Because you have to do it in probably a lot of different ways. I mean, I guess for the caregiver, it's easier to show the love, but like you said, not feeling loved is probably the issue for the caregiver. So where can you find that love? Because like you said, it's going to look a little different.
Yeah. So part of it is to remember that people who are on this dementia journey have a tendency to become more and more sensory oriented. So touch is very, very important. So doing things like sitting physically close to your person, keeping your hand on their knee, patting their cheek, holding hands, kissing, hugging, those things are very, very important. And those are really great sensory rich ways to express your care for another person. The thing that's difficult for a spouse or a caregiver is that your loved one won't necessarily initiate all of that. So sometimes it's hard because you're sitting there with your spouse and you're waiting for them to react in such a way that tells you they love you, they're glad to see you, that kind of thing. But by the way the brain is being impacted by the disease process, they lose the ability to initiate those things. But they will still be able to respond to you if you initiate the contact.
Yeah.
The other thing is to think about ways that you can express your love to your spouse in ways other than words. Saying I love you is important. I'm not saying it's not, but sometimes the more advanced an individual is on this journey, the more difficulty they have understanding words and what the impact of those words are. One of the best gifts you can give somebody with dementia is to just be physically present and be attentive. Yeah. Focus on them, not the environment around you. So music is a great way to do that. Dancing is a great way to express physical intimacy. Dance to your favorite songs, the song that was played at your wedding, the things that are from the long ago past that your loved one is still going to be able to connect to, may not be able to express to you, oh, this was our wedding song, but physically, emotionally, spiritually, they're going to respond to that music. They're going to respond to your touch. They're going to remember what it feels like to be in your embrace when you're dancing. Yeah. So it's finding other important, impactful ways to express your love other than just through words. Yeah. And starting to be able to read your loved one's response to you in those new sensory-oriented ways beyond just what we've always typically thought are the ways people express love or intimacy. The other thing is try to think about in the time that you and your significant other or spouse have been together, what were your two love languages? You hear people talk about love language and how do we express love. Just think about it from the perspective of how did your spouse always show you love? Yeah. So if you have a husband whose way of letting you know that he really loved you wasn't necessarily saying, Christine, I love you, but maybe he came home every week with a bouquet of your favorite flowers, which were daisies, okay? If you know and remember that, reconnect to your spouse to that. Maybe go someplace and pick out daisies together and go, boy, you know what, Dave, I remember how much you showed me you loved me because you brought me daisies every week. And you're reconnecting him to those ways that in the past always had such a meaning for you because it was his expressions of love. Yeah. Same way from your perspective. Think about what were the things that you always did for your loved one in the past that let him know you loved him. I remember in my mom and dad's scenario, one of the ways that my mom expressed her love to my dad is she always baked him homemade bread. That was one of his very favorite things. He always knew how much work it was for her to do that, but when he would come in from the field, she'd have a fresh loaf of bread in the oven. He'd smell that. And I remember when he had his dementia process, she went out of her way to make sure she did that every week. And he wouldn't say a word, but he'd wander out in the kitchen, follow the smell, put his arms around her and hug her, and then sit down at the table and wait for the bread to come out of the oven.
Which he always did. No, I'm just kidding. I think it just is remembering things are going to look a little different, but you can still find those nuggets that show love.
Right, absolutely. And that's it. Don't give up on it. Don't let people convince you that because your loved one has dementia, your relationship's going to fall apart. There's not going to be love anymore, that there's not going to be tenderness or light. That is an absolute falsehood.
Just looks different.
Yep.
Support for the Living Wisdom podcast is provided by In Touch Pharmaceuticals, a long-term care pharmacy committed to meeting the specialized pharmaceutical needs of their clients. Visit intouchpharma.com.